Good afternoon to you. 406 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up this hour at 4:30, Congressman Brad Wenstrup is here. He's the chairman of the subcommittee on the coronavirus pandemic. They just spent 2 days questioning one Dr. Anthony Fauci. All of a sudden, he's given us the Sergeant Schultz routine. He doesn't remember. I know nothing, he says, about how that whole pandemic got started. We'll get into that. Are Hogan Heroes references still good? Do they work? And then Brandon Judd is here, the president of the Border Patrol Union. We'll talk to him at 5 o'clock about how Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas needs to go and why. And you can talk to us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Yeah, the big news today on Capitol Hill, Hunter Biden showed up for an oversight committee hearing where they're contemplating holding him in contempt of Congress. He sat in the audience so as to further mock Congress and declare that he, of course, is way above the law. My dad's the president. And we started to dig in today in the last hour into the guy who has been giving him all this money, Kevin Morris. And I just want to kind of run through the timeline with you a little bit on how all of this began. So remember, of course, Joe Biden runs for president, 2019. Things are getting more and more intense. And by December, they have this donor meeting that's, a gathering of donors. And among them is Kevin Morris. And while he's there, that's reportedly when he meets Hunter Biden for the first time. Hunter had already been the subject of a lot of debate and back and forth here in Washington because Donald Trump chose to bring to the American people's attention as a part of his presidential campaign that, yes, the Bidens are corrupt and they've been selling out America in order to enrich themselves. And for the sin of noticing that, the Democrats organized an impeachment to hurt Trump, for which he was acquitted in the United States Senate. But by December of 2019, of course, Kevin Morris is aware of all of this. Morris, who got rich in Hollywood, connected to the South Park guys. He's been associated with all sorts of projects in Hollywood. And he says, okay, he's going to tap into his vast fortune, and he's going to start to get rid of the Biden family's political liabilities. And one of those liabilities, obviously, is the vast sum of money that Hunter Biden owes to the American taxpayer that he was stiffing us on because he's a deadbeat. He had collected all of this cash overseas, and he refused to pay his taxes, millions of dollars in back taxes. So Kevin Morris swoops in. He's not some longtime friend. He's a Biden campaign donor. And he begins paying off all of these bills in the form of loans to Hunter Biden. Now, the reason it's important that they're structured as loans is because if you take a loan from someone, it's not considered income for the purpose of taxation. It's money that you owe back. And so you are not being taxed on that because it's not income. And so by considering it a loan, boy, they've really come up with a system here, haven't they? Now, what's in it for Kevin Morris? Why does he loan all of this money to Hunter? Well, one of the obvious things is he's clearly meddling in the election to advantage the Bidens. That's first and foremost. He is swooping in to try and resolve the Biden family's political liabilities to get Joe Biden elected. That's the role that he's playing at the outset. And he's now still playing that role insofar as he's trying to get Joe Biden reelected by making it seem like Hunter Biden's just a victim. He's just a victim of a mean campaign to go after a guy who had a drug problem just because he's related to his father. When, of course, it has everything to do with Joe Biden's corruption and the use of his son, his poor drug-addled son, as the vehicle through which that family's corruption would continue. And so there was testimony. If you recall back earlier in the year, there was IRS whistleblower testimony where the whistleblowers revealed, both behind closed doors and in public, everything that they had detected inside of the Biden family's finances and how suspicious it was. Now, of course, you had prosecutors in the federal government who were shutting down lines of inquiry. People who were saying, U.S. Attorney's Office in Delaware, that you can't even look into the big guy. No digging into dad. No asking about Pop. And then, of course, you had prosecutors in that very same office who were calling the Biden family ahead of time to let them know that various investigative tactics were taking place. Hey, they were coming for that storage unit. Hey, we're going to send guys to interview everybody associated with all of this. They would tell them the day before. Now, they would excuse all of it, saying that they were just trying to coordinate with the Secret Service, because if you're protected by the Secret Service, then these federal law enforcement agencies should work together. No surprises for the Secret Service. But the effect of it was, of course, to give a heads up to the Bidens and give them plenty of time to both clear out a storage unit and to alert all of their friends and family that they needed to clam up when investigators got to them, which, of course, is what happened, obviously. But those IRS whistleblowers in their testimony revealed that they were concerned, somewhat convinced, that they believed that Kevin Morris, this friend, was committing a campaign finance violation, that he was giving massive amounts of money to benefit Joe Biden's election campaign in the form of paying off all of these debts and covering all of these expenses to make a huge political story go away. So they detected a campaign finance violation, and that would be kind of consistent with what we've seen in the recent past, in the very least, and some of the Democrat logic we've seen for sure. Remember, Michael Cohen pleads guilty to a campaign finance violation, never goes to trial, but a campaign finance violation for having been the guy who facilitated a payment to Stormy Daniels as a condition of a non-disclosure agreement, that Stormy wouldn't continue to make all sorts of claims that she's making in exchange for taking a little bit of money. And as a result, she wouldn't go out in public and slander or express any thought about her time or relationship with Donald Trump, right? It was a non-disclosure agreement. That got turned into by the left a campaign finance violation. It's illegal. So Michael Cohen pleads guilty. Later, Alvin Bragg, the Soros-funded attorney in Manhattan, would turn all of this into a basis to charge Trump, to indict Trump. He's guilty of a campaign finance violation. How? Because Stormy Daniels received money in exchange for a non-disclosure agreement. Therefore, it's a campaign finance violation because you were trying to resolve some issue that would have been embarrassing in the press. Wait a second. Okay, so if that's the basis, then why wouldn't Kevin Morris be doing the very same thing at a much higher scale? We're talking millions upon millions of dollars. So he's given a lot of money here in the form of these loans. In return, he's gotten some interesting things. One, we just brought up in the last hour how he received a huge equity stake, 10% equity stake, in BHR Partners, this big Chinese equity firm that Hunter Biden owned that huge equity stake in. He divested to Kevin Morris. Also, Kevin Morris has purchased, this is interesting, we found out this week, he's purchased nearly $1 million in Hunter Biden's so-called artwork. What is that about? Oh, so Hunter Biden needs money to pay me back. Why don't I just give it to him by laundering it through artwork, and then he gives me the cash back? What is happening here? Yesterday, testimony to the Congress, to the Oversight Committee, by the art dealer. I've been calling him Georges Berger. I think it's Georges Berger or something like that. He's the gallerist. He says, that whole thing about how Hunter Biden's never going to know who actually buys his art, so that way there's no influence peddling going on, it was a lie. He revealed yesterday that Hunter Biden's aware of more than 70% of the purchases. He knows who bought his artwork. Over 70% of the buyers. My guess is it's 100%, not 70. But even if it's just 70%, what happened with the buyers? Well, we know now that among them was was a woman by the name of Elizabeth Hirsch Naftali. She paid $42,000 for Hunter's macaroni art in February of 2021. And then by July, she received a prestigious appointment to a presidential commission. That's what it costs. $42,000, you get to join a presidential commission. And then she gave another $52,000 for more macaroni art in December of 2022. Berger confirmed as well that Hollywood lawyer Kevin Morris bought $875,000 worth of art in a January 2023 deal alone. Why would he have to buy the art? I thought they were friends. Why wouldn't Hunter just give him the art? Here's Here's some artwork. I just made it for you. I made a macaroni picture just for you, Dad. Why wouldn't he do that? Instead, it was paid for $875,000. And let's go back on the dates here. I reminded you, December of 2019 is when Kevin Morris meets Hunter at a donor event. By February, 2 months later, Hunter Biden announced that he would begin publicly selling this artwork. 2 months later. That's a weird coincidence, isn't it? In fact, the New York Times had a big photo spread of Hunter Biden sitting in an art studio that I think was actually paid for by Kevin Morris. And they wrote, "There's a new artist in town." That was the headline. This is February of 2020. "There's a new artist in town. The name is Biden," they write. And this is how the lead of the story goes. It's a classic sort of glossy magazine lead. "Dressed in Oxford boots, jeans, and a long-sleeve T-shirt, Hunter Biden ushered a reporter down a stone walkway into a pool house turned art studio in the Hollywood Hills. It was filled with colorful works of decorative abstraction, psychedelic florals, and ethereal patterns that looked like nature viewed through a microscope. Leaning toward the surreal, there were nearly 100 of them, all by his own hand. Some were signed R.H. Biden for Robert Hunter Biden, the 50-year-old son of the former vice president," they write. And then the piece goes on and on about how he's going to try his hand at this, and he wants to sell artwork, and they're going to get tens of thousands of dollars for it, and he's just an undiscovered, struggling artist, and it's nonsense. It's just nonsense throughout. And so that's where Kevin Morris appears. Now, another place that Kevin Morris appears is he's been financing a film crew that's following Hunter Biden all around, I believe including today's events. Why wouldn't they? Today was some of the great footage that they might be pursuing of Hunter Biden going and sticking it to the man, sticking it to Congress. 6 days ago, the New York Post had this report. Hunter Biden's sugar brother, Kevin Morris, plots gauzy documentary on First Son. Lights, camera, corruption, they write. First Son, Hunter Biden's so-called sugar brother, Hollywood attorney Kevin Morris, is backing a soft-focused documentary on the disgraced and indicted presidential offspring. While the First Son's life is viewed through his now infamous laptop resembles a Quentin Tarantino film with plenty of not-so-tasteful nudity, the untitled Morris project would show a more gentle Hunter, painting, selling his art, raising his son, and navigating everyday life as a sober adult with ongoing criminal investigations in the crosshairs of former President Donald Trump and his supporters. The LA Times credulously reported that this week. A film crew has been trailing Hunter, 53, for years and was recently spotted recording the First Son publicly defying a subpoena from the House Oversight Committee to sit for a deposition December 13th. That's the first time he defied Congress publicly. The Post has also noted the presence of cameras around the Biden scion, including when Hunter cozied up to one of our reporters at a December 2022 showing of his surprisingly pricey work at Soho's Georges Berger Gallery. The crew also popped up at the same gallery in the fall of 2021 at the very first public showing by the world's most well-compensated amateur artist. Morris even took his cameras all the way to Serbia. You ready for this? Where the crew crashed the set where filmmaker Phelim McAleer, you remember this story? You remember this movie? My Son Hunter? You remember this? We talked to Phelim right here on the show, didn't we? We had him on for an interview. And Robert Davi played Joe, right? In the movie? Somebody, I forget everybody's character in the movie, but it was kind of like a zany sort of Biden family film. Fun for the whole family. And it was big. Conservative media was talking about it. A lot of, because, of course, the left-wing media didn't want to give it the time of day. But apparently Hunter Biden's people were very excited to go and crash the set as they were filming this thing. They went all the way to Serbia. The crew of Hunter's documentary crashed the set. The Ireland-born McAleer told the LA Times he allowed Morris and his crew to film on their set for a few days. And even went out to dinner with his adversary. I presume that means Morris. So Phelim McAleer went out to dinner with Kevin Morris thinking, he's just like a Hollywood lawyer guy. He probably should have done a little bit more research on the dude. At one point, the director said Morris began asking him questions along the lines of, "What was the history of the laptop? What do I know? And what did I know?" Fallon McAleer said about the history of the laptop. He was out there looking for information and evidence for his client while he was pretending to be something he was not, McAleer claimed. There's no current release date for the flick, but if it ever does show up at a theater or a streaming service near you, it may be among the costliest openings in history, says the New York Post. So it looks like there's a lot of money-making projects still going on all around Hunter Biden, and this Kevin Morris character is at the center of all of it, isn't he? And there he was today, sitting next to Hunter, as Hunter defied Congress yet again. I think it's fascinating, and I think it is. There's clearly some sort of money laundering or something going on here with this guy. It's wild to watch. It's 4:22 now. All right, just minutes ago, an update to the Hunter Biden saga. House Judiciary Committee has voted to hold Hunter Biden in contempt. A final vote of 23-14. Fox News with the reporting here. The resolution now moves to the full House for consideration on whether Hunter Biden should be held in contempt of Congress. The House Oversight Committee is weighing another resolution to hold the first son in contempt. One of the questions in front of us today was, did the White House know about all of this? Did the White House know in advance what was going to happen here, that Hunter Biden was going to once again thumb his nose at the American people in Congress? Here's the question to Corinne today.
Was the White House informed in advance that Hunter Biden would be showing up at the House Oversight Committee's hearing on Capitol Hill today?
So here's what I'll say, and I've said this many times before. Hunter, as you all know, is a private citizen. He's not a member of this White House.
That's not an answer.
He makes his own decisions.
Nope.
Like he did today about how to respond to
Still
Congress.
Not answering.
And so I would refer you any further questions, any additional questions about this process, certainly I would refer you to Hunter's representatives.
Oh, so that's where we go, to Hunter's people to find out what the president is up to? Well, that's what his business partners do. Coming up, Brad Wenstrup, the congressman, will be with us. We'll talk to him about Dr. Fauci's 2 days of testimony. Suddenly, he's forgetting what happened during the pandemic. Good afternoon. 4:35 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, top of the hour, the president of the National Border Patrol Union will be with us, Brandon Judd, as the House contemplates impeachment for Alejandro Mayorkas. He'll tell us why that needs to happen. And you can join us at 888-630-9625. 888-630-WMAL. For the last 2 days, Dr. Anthony Fauci has been testifying behind closed doors to a committee in the United States House dedicated to getting to the bottom of just what happened in our great country and to our great country. Here with more details on what was actually revealed behind closed doors is Congressman Brad Wenstrup. He's from Ohio's 2nd Congressional District, and he is the chairman of the Select Subcommittee on the coronavirus pandemic. Congressman, good to have you with us, sir. Thank you very much.
Vince, it's my pleasure to be with you today.
Boy,
really, thank you.
I want to, first of all, I just want to give you a round of applause for talking to Anthony Fauci for 14 hours straight. That feels like it'd be painful, honestly. But what did you learn over 2 days?
Well, we really learned a lot. I mean, it was a 14-hour deal, and we split time with the minority, so Democrats have just as much time to ask him questions. Well, I think we did a lot of research, and we were very prepared to ask him a lot of questions. You know, one of the things that we did in an effort to get ready for Dr. Fauci is to talk to all those that had worked around him, or at least as many as we possibly could, so that we would have data of things that were actually said. And we subpoenaed conversations between some of the scientists that wrote Proximal Origins that Dr. Fauci came on the White House lawn and talked about as definitively it seemed to be coming from nature. That's basically what it came across. You know, now he says he's open to the possibility of it coming out of a lab. But I will say that, you know, he didn't recall things over 100 times. And he didn't recall conversations about the origins of COVID or the Wuhan Institute of Virology with President Trump or President Biden. Didn't recall having any conversations with them.
Wasn't
I don't know how the rest of America could be having these conversations, but he wasn't with the president.
Of course, he's lying, and from my perspective.
Yeah.
So, wasn't he at the center of trying to suffocate the consideration of the lab as being the source of COVID? He was working behind the scenes to get people to bury that as an issue. So now he says he doesn't remember that?
Well, it certainly seems like he had connections with the people that wrote the paper that it came from Nature. We have the conversations he was having with them. He put them together. He even, during those conversations, said, we know they're doing this type of work in Wuhan. All the people that were on the article had said that this thing looks engineered. There's no way we can rule it out. And even the very day that he released on the White House lawn saying, these scientists said it came from Nature, and I'll share this article with you. That same day, one of the authors in his internal documents said, we still can't rule out engineering. And that same doctor was the one who said, I'm focused on disproving the lab leak theory, in spite of saying that they thought it came from the lab. So we have a lot of evidence besides just our conversations with him.
Yes.
But it gave us a chance to ask him about it. And if he said something contradictory to what we have in evidence, I think that's going to be very foreboding in the future. But as much as anything, we wanted to figure out how our government structure works or doesn't work and have lessons learned. And there were a lot of lessons, because you have the nation being told, be 6 feet apart. And what he said was that guidance just sort of happened. A lot of times he'll talk about the golden rule and you got to have double-blind studies and things like that. And yet he said that just sort of happened. He also admitted that the vaccine mandates could increase vaccine hesitancy. And I said, we had a very hearing on America doesn't do well with because I told you so. Americans want to be educated, not indoctrinated, and they want to talk to their doctor. And the mandates themselves came from a politician and said, you must go get this shot. And he never said anything about go talk to your doctor, see if it's best for you, discuss your health with your doctor. What can this do for you? Just like any other medication. So we were doing things in terribly wrong ways and trying to manage the American people. And so the trust in our government agencies and health have been greatly diminished. And so I think we made a lot of headway.
Yes.
And I think we've got him saying he's changing his mind on a lot of things. So that can be a positive for us going forward, especially to those who follow him religiously.
Yes.
And so we have next steps. We got a lot of work to do to devise a system that's actually going to work on behalf of the American people and not for political and personal purposes.
There's so many things about Anthony Fauci that drive me crazy. One of the things is that he admitted to the New York Times at one point that he was lying to the public about herd immunity thresholds. He said he was watching public polling and then he would change the numbers in his conversations based on how comfortable the public was with the numbers he was sharing. Did he account for that at all in your behind closed doors testimony?
We didn't get into that, but basically you're talking about scientific versus political.
Yes. Because
if you're polling what people think, that's not how science works. Science works on facts. Now, you can have hypothesis, and you can, I'm a doctor, you can have a hypothesis, but one of the things I said to him, too, about origins is he said, well, I talked to these evolutionary virologists, and this is what they said. And so I went with that, but I'm open. Now he says he's open to other ideas. I said, but you haven't talked to anybody with any other ideas. You haven't explored that. You haven't said that. You never did say that. And then I asked him and I shared some research with him and asked him if he's ever read these pieces, these published peer-reviewed articles. And he said, no. I said, well, it might be good because they talk a lot about the science behind creating a infectious virus in the lab. And he also, it was interesting because, he had the interactions with Rand Paul that so many people know about, where he said NIH does not fund gain-of-function research. And what he said about that was basically, well, he has a different definition of gain-of-function research.
That's crazy.
Well, when did he come up with that new definition? It came up later.
But also,
They created that afterwards.
And also that semantic game is a way of avoiding the underlying issue. Was the United States funding research that made viruses more dangerous in China? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yeah. And
Yes,
Fauci
we
doesn't
were.
even want to admit it, does he?
Well, we've had some people that he knows that have answered that question with a yes, and that will come forward at some point.
Okay. So we have more testimony yet to be made public. Will we see a transcript of Anthony Fauci's testimony before your committee?
Yes, we will release it. It has to go through, and his team has to approve it, as well as the minority and the majority. And we review it to make sure that it's accurate and everything before it goes out. So I look forward to putting it out. I will tell you, I think we were very professional on our end, and I think that Dr. Fauci felt so too. We let him answer the questions the way he wanted to answer. It may contradict some other facts that we have, but we let him do it. And part of the time, I had good scientific debate with him as a physician, talking about treatment options and why didn't we look more at natural immunity? Why didn't we use the idea of convalescent plasma, which was being used early, where if somebody had COVID and recovered, they could donate their plasma. It could go to someone else, and a lot of people were helped by that. We just kind of dropped that. It just became vaccine almost only. Very little talk about the monoclonal antibodies. There was talk about that in the antivirals, but there's other opportunities out there too. When you understand the science of who gets infected,
Yes.
there's just more things that we can pursue in the future if we see a virus like this again.
Also, why did the CDC and the NIH, why did they sit on so much data and not release it to the public? Right? I mean, there was a lot of information that was of value that was being held back, including the incidence of myocarditis among young men, about the efficacy of these jabs among younger people. It wasn't that high, that masks weren't really working, that filtration systems on airplanes were phenomenal. There was no justification for masking people on airplanes. That was always crazy, and it was well known early. Why was the federal government incapable of admitting any of that?
And that's the thing. If you look, he started off by saying you don't need a mask, and then he said you do need a mask. Well, what people expect to hear from public health officials is if you're changing your mind, that's fine, because as new data or new science comes in, change your mind, but explain why you're changing your mind. And I really pointed out that the messaging was bad. And so for example, we talked about how the grant process works for this type of research that we fund. Oh, well, it goes to a board. They're kind of an agnostic board, if you will, and I'm paraphrasing here, but they do that. Once they approve it, I just sign it. So he actually said that he doesn't really read it. And we talked about oversight. So EcoHealth Alliance, for example, wasn't doing their required reporting on their research to NIH. And there's no red flag that goes up at NIH apparently to say you haven't done your reporting. And so when we asked him about that, doesn't that concern you? He goes, well, that's over in compliance. That's not really my lane. And if I can sum things up, what he was framing his role was really all about understanding the virus and creating a vaccine. Well, that may be true, but America felt like you were the face of all science associated with this. And as a result, it created quite a divide within our country.
Also, did any conversation about China come up? I remember Anthony Fauci making a lot of excuses for the Chinese government, especially in the early days of the pandemic, saying that they were being great partners, even in the midst of them deleting information and withholding information about how infectious this virus was right from the get-go.
Yeah, and then he just tried to back off and say, well, I don't know what they're doing in their lab. How can I know what they're doing in all their labs? Well, just say that. Say that you don't, but that should be a concern if we're funding any type of research within their lab. That should be a concern for all of us. And you never came out and said much about it. And we were learning what was going on in those labs. And I sit on Intelligence Committee. And I started, I've looked at bioweapons before COVID ever hit. Right. And when this hit, I'm certainly going along that line. And what is going on in China? What is going on in their labs? What do their bioweapons, what does their bioweapons research look like with their military and everything else? And guess where it's conducted? In Wuhan. So you got to put these pieces of the puzzle together pretty simply. And when they start destroying data and things like that, that should be a huge red flag. I think right now we have an administration that does not want to hold China accountable in any way. I mean, I don't think when the president just met with President Xi in San Francisco, I never heard anything where they even talked about the pandemic. Not one bit. How can you not be having these conversations? That should be a huge part of that conversation.
It's insane to me. One last one for you, Congressman Brad Wenstrup, again, chairman of the subcommittee on the coronavirus pandemic. They just sat down with Anthony Fauci for 2 days. I see some reports that Fauci told your committee that he's, quote, not convinced that kids actually suffered learning loss during the pandemic because of the government-imposed closures. Did he really say that? He thinks that the verdict is still out of whether it was bad for kids?
That's pretty much what he said, and we countered that. And I can just give you one example. I have a 6-year-old, and so during that time, she's in pre-K going to school with a mask every day. Well, when it was all said and done, she had to go to speech therapy. Now, I don't know if that would have happened anyway, but when she doesn't see people forming words for 2 years, except at home, that's a little bit of a challenge for a kid, I think. She's fine now. But the learning loss is tremendous. And I said early on with all of this, even at a higher level, you can't ask a 6th grade teacher to teach a 4th grade class. How are we going to catch them up? That's another thing. So how can he say there was no learning loss? Because we really didn't do anything. So he says the jury's out.
Yeah.
But then again, he'll defer to, well, that's not really my lane. That's over there in education, and I'm the scientist about the virus and the vaccine.
And of course, and
I will say this too. We in a 2020 email that our subcommittee released early this year, it proved that Dr. Fauci was aware of dangerous gain-of-function research in Wuhan because he talked about it. He was asked about the dangers of gain-of-function research in 2012 in an interview in Weekend Australia, where he said, "Well, I think the benefits outweigh the risk." I brought that up to him. You talked about this. So you admitted there's a risk, but you felt the benefits were greater. Well, you're entitled to that opinion, but I'm wondering if you really have that deep down, have that same opinion today as you did in 2012.
Did he answer?
No, I mean, I'm saying that now.
Oh,
I wonder, but I said you said these things, so clearly you're aware of the risk.
Yes,
and should have been addressing that.
And it's by your knowledge as a
director,
as a doctor, and as a congressman, is there any evidence that it's ever produced a positive benefit? I don't think there is.
I understand the premise, and so if you can somehow safely create a virus that has potential to be a human pathogen, and in the lab create a vaccine, or have a system to quickly create a vaccine or a treatment for that matter,
right?
Then you could have potential benefits long term. And I think that's the thinking of those early on. But there were also those at the same time in the scientific community saying,
yes,
why would we do this? Why, let's just respond to what comes our way. Don't necessarily create something that could potentially create a pandemic. And by the way, there was an article written by a doctor, I think it was in 2012, or there was a process of making H5N1 even more infectious and putting out the process, and Dr. Fauci wanted that banned. And I did say, I'm curious as to why you didn't want that with COVID. Well, he didn't. He's claiming he didn't know much about what was going on in China.
He's totally ignorant all of a sudden. Amazing. Thank you very much for asking the questions. Congressman Brad Wenstrup in the Congress, of course, and the subcommittee on the coronavirus pandemic. Thank you, sir. All right, a lot of headlines popping up right now that Chris Christie, remember him? He's set to hold a news conference tonight, apparently minutes from now. We'll keep our ears open. Some reports indicating that he is set to drop out of the Republican primary this afternoon. Apparently, some donors have been pressuring him lately, saying, it's not working. All you're doing is attacking Trump. The voters don't want that. Well, they're right about that. We'll see. This could, of course, be an effort to try and consolidate what little support he has behind Nikki Haley. Maybe if she comes in a distant second in New Hampshire, it'll be a good way to charge up her campaign. Who knows? These people all have ambitions. we'll track them and we'll share with you. Coming up, also, we've got joining us on the program, Brandon Judd, the head of the Border Patrol Union. He's got a lot to say about Alejandro Mayorkas.